Welcome, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us today. I see people are still joining, so just wanted to do a really quick introduction. And again, thank you all for taking time to join us for this fun panel discussion that we have coming our way. I'm Angie Schaefer. I'm the Executive Director of the Fund for Education Abroad, and you are joining us for a day of virtual events as part of our third annual FEA Day. This is a day that we've decided we're going to dedicate to FEA, getting the word out about the work we're doing, helping students apply, talking with people about why this work matters. And so we really appreciate you taking time to join us and be a part of this conversation. I wanted to quickly just do an introduction to FEA and let you all read a little bit about our mission, our vision, and our Jedi statement. I think one of our founders, who will be one of the panelists, is going to talk a little bit about this too. So I won't go too into detail, but basically we're a scholarship organization. We provide study abroad scholarships to students who have been historically excluded and not represented in study abroad data. So we work primarily with students who are people of color, first generation college students, community college students, many students who have never left the US, all who have financial need, and we're really proud of the work we're doing. And we're really excited to talk with you a little bit more about it. But we're also just excited to hear that you're here with us today and you're part of this work, and you're looking forward to hearing why our panelists are here and brought together with FEA to talk about why travel and education abroad can be such life-changing experiences. So thus far, FEA has awarded close to 1,100 scholarships, totaling more than 3.4 million. We've recently received the Diversity Abroad Organizational Champion Award. We've also received awards in the past from the National Scholarship Providers Association, from goabroad.com. We remain the only independently funded and fully philanthropic study abroad scholarship provider, providing scholarships to students nationwide who want to study abroad. So we are not alone in this work by any means. And we are very, very grateful again for many of you for amplifying the work that we're doing. So with that all said, I am going to hand the mic over to Grant, who is going to be running our panel discussion today and moderating the session. And we're really, really looking forward to hearing from all of the panelists. Thank you all again for making time to join us today.
Thank you, Angie. Thanks for the introduction. Good morning or afternoon or night, depending on wherever you are located. As Angie mentioned, my name is Makeda Haughton. I am the founder and the creator of the Sobe podcast and also the author of Kimimani, the Girl Made of Magic. And I am so excited to be moderating the panel today and talk more about the travel industry. And our goal today is we only have about 1 hour together, but I want to make sure that this is the best panel you've been to on the topic of travel. And we want to learn how to provide ongoing support to those students that Angie mentioned who are underrepresented among the US study abroad population. Now, we are going to pack lots of information in this hour, but I'm going to need the help of you, the audience, to achieve our goal. So please, if you have questions throughout our discussion, please feel free to type them into the chat box. I will try to get to them throughout the conversation, but if not, we have some time allotted towards the end to answer those questions for you. Okay, so I am going to begin introducing our amazing expert panelists. We have 3 travel experts today with decades long of experience, so I'm also going to be learning a lot from them. Our first panelist we have is David Sanderson, who is a graduate from the University of Michigan. David is a team lead at StudentUniverse. Now, StudentUniverse is a company that empowers students and youth to see the world, and they provide exclusive travel deals. David, I really wish I would have known about this when I was in college, but I'm still just glad that some of those struggling college students get to utilize Student University. Our next panelist we have today is Phil Agbeko, co-founding Hilltop Global Group with his fellow Georgetown University alumni, which it's headquartered right here in Washington, D.C. And Hilltop Global Group is managed by diaspora Africans who are passionate about shaping the narrative about the continent of Africa. So Phil, I'm really interested to learn more about you and your company. And last but not least, we have our expert panelist, Kate Simpson, who's a graduate from Yale University with a degree in East Asian Studies, and she also pursued her postgraduate fellowship in Chinese literature at Taiwan National University. She is also the president of Academic Travel Abroad, which focuses on travel services for organizations who want to serve their members through travel and learning. So like I mentioned, these are some travel experts. So I'm really, really glad to speak with them today. And please welcome all of our three amazing panelists. I will go to David. David, I know when I was reading your biography, you mentioned that you actually didn't start out with the travel industry. You kind of had a career change. Can you just share with me, I guess, the specific moment or experience that may have inspired you to pursue your career in travel?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much, Makeda. And I'll just start by saying I appreciate being here and learning from everyone else here on the panel and of course, the questions that are going to come to us here in the future. But for me, this kind of started actually back during my degree seeking years at the University of Michigan. I am someone that may have had more opportunity than others, but it kind of flew right past me. So when I was in college, I was very much focused on journalism and writing and sort of this extra area of electronic media. And I think at the time I knew I was really interested in writing. I just didn't really know how to apply that. And by the time I had finished, I basically had student loans I had to pay off. And a friend of mine had worked in the travel industry at the time at STA Travel, which was actually a brick and mortar travel agency on campus at the University of Michigan. So I kind of just fell into the travel industry while I was looking for an income as a way to sort of advance into another future career at some point. But within 6 months of that, I was placed on a flight to New Zealand by myself, where I went on sort of a large group tour with 30 other people of the same age range from different parts of the world. So even though I skipped, a very clear opportunity I had to engage in education abroad while I was in my educational years, I kind of felt like when I entered the industry, that was a new path for me to sort of learn through travel. So just taking that first step, that first trip, and it's not exactly study abroad, but the travel piece of it can have a profound impact. And that's sort of what's driven me down this path. And now 20 years later, I'm basically talking to students every day about this stuff. And it's very much from that educational framework and not even so much about, leisure trips or backpacking through Europe, like kind of what it used to be when I started. So.
Right. And David, it's interesting that you mentioned that you kind of fell into travel because I feel that was something similar to me. Phil, is that something that kind of happened with you? It was a complete shift during college. How did you, what was that moment or experience that inspired your career in travel?
Yeah, first off, thanks to FEA for the invitation, and it's great to be here with everyone. So it kind of was also accidental in many ways because, my background is, although very eclectic, it had absolutely nothing to do with travel or even education. So in my case, in business school, I had the opportunity of doing some study abroad, and we went to very fantastic destinations. But the moment itself came during my capstone for my MBA program. And my group had a project to compare, characteristics that made a destination attractive for tourism. And so my project was based on benchmarking Hong Kong versus Vietnam to see why one was more successful in attracting tourists than the others. And so through that very rigorous academic exercise, I got very fascinated by, the travel industry, specifically as it relates to education. And quite frankly, right after submitting our final thesis on that project, we started Hilltop.
Oh, okay. So it seems like there is a correlation to everyone kind of falling into the travel industry. Kate, I know Phil mentioned that he was in Asia when this happened. I know there is a correlation with you and Asia and East Asian studies. What was your experience like when you began pursuing the travel industry? Is it similar or what was it like?
Thank you, Kita, and thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
Essentially, yeah, I fell into it as well. It was not something I even imagined existed, that there was an educational travel sphere. I knew certainly about the travel sphere, but that wasn't of interest at the time. And I was working on the Hill for Harry Reid, and I was looking for a job involving China. And I ended up putting my resume, in those days, no internet. That's how old I am. And I put an actual piece of paper in a binder at the US-China Business Council. And somebody flipped through that binder and found my resume and interviewed me at Academic Travel Abroad. So that was a revelation to me, that this whole part of the industry existed. And at that time, we were serving the Smithsonian Institution with educational trips to China. And in those days, you could do decorative arts of China, and you could do, very specific China-focused tours. And I fell in love immediately with the field.
Awesome. And I actually want to talk about something that you mentioned, Kate. You said that there was no technology at the time, or no email. How do you think, what was the most impactful innovation in the travel industry since, I guess, you began your career, because it's changed so much?
Well, I remember having to use a telex machine to communicate with China, and telex machines were charged by the word. So you had to, not only did you have to communicate clearly with very, very few words, but you had to type in a very clunky machine to be able to communicate with China. So I would say email was a huge revelation. And believe it or not, I was working with a little company in Wuhan, China, and they had email before the Americans did. And it was really annoying that they were saying, could you please get email? So that completely revolutionized the way we worked. And in those days, we had one computer, a DOS computer with that green type, and we had to share it among 3 or 4 colleagues. So we would have to book time at the computer. So imagine the efficiencies we gained when that happened.
I know email was a game changer. I know we were speaking a little bit prior, and how much technology has grown. And Phil, as I was watching Kate, I saw that you had a smile when she mentioned the difference in technology. What do you think was the most impactful innovation in travel since you began?
Well, I mean, clearly, the use of things like digital technologies, for example, is one thing. I mean, mobile applications. Sorry, mobile applications is a big deal. That forms a comprehensive sort of travel companion in many ways, because what happens is now you can book a flight on your phone. You can get all the information you need on your phone. We're talking about things like mobile boarding passes, things of that nature. Those didn't exist many years ago. You have things like contactless check-in due to the whole COVID pandemic. So I think that out of a lot of crises have come these innovations. For me, one of the most phenomenal innovations is really the real-time tracking. So you go on FlightAware and you can check end to end at any point in time. I like to do that when my mother travels because she doesn't like flying, so I get very nervous, and so I always have and it's spot on. I don't know if any of you use any of these tracking tools, but and I think this is just the beginning, because we haven't even gotten into the AI component of technology in travel in a significant way, and that's yet to come as well.
Yeah, and I actually want to talk about the AI, but I just want to quickly jump right over to David. David, what do you think would be the most impactful innovation since you began your career? Is it similar to what Phil or Kate mentioned?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, email is a big part of it, but what I find funny is when I started, we were still doing paper tickets. So if I had issued you a ticket and it was a paper ticket and you had somehow contacted us to change that ticket, we had to actually print out a little sticker and physically mail it to them. So if they were in Africa, if they were in Asia or anywhere else in the world, they had to get that, or they would have to literally go directly to the airport to do it. So nowadays we kind of whine a little bit when our phones go down for 2 minutes or we can't load our boarding pass at the airport, but it could be a lot worse, right? And I think, at least from the agent perspective, when I started, there was this element of the .com boom had kind of happened, and there was this push to online, right? So that's all people saw on TV was Expedia and ads to do it all the easy way. So there was this idea as an agent where you were kind of competing with the technology in a way. But now it's a little bit more of a hybrid situation to where we have web pages that we can build ourselves, and that myself or an agent behind the scenes can tweak that web page. We can change the content that the students see, and it sort of creates this hybrid model where you work with an agency like us and you could have the online piece and let those independent or more savvy students handle that, or work with like our human to human team and just have that old school agent experience. That's the big thing from an agent perspective. But as Phil mentioned, the AI stuff is incredible, really. And I don't know if anyone's taken a moment to just look at Chat GPT, which is very easy to download and use. Just download it and type in the question, what should I consider when I'm changing an airline ticket? And it will spit out a very comprehensive list that's easy to understand. And so from my perspective, I mean, this is stuff I've been writing up for years, like templates and talking about it. But the AI is going to be a game changer. So the question is, when the students go to use a website in the future, do they log in? Does that website sort of dynamically change to reflect the institution they're traveling with? And then ultimately, does the search function on a website change? Maybe you just log in and ask the computer a question. I'm going here. What's the best option for me given these stipulations? So people are afraid of AI in a way, which is a healthy concern, but there are very clear benefits, right? And it's going to have a major impact on every industry.
And David, I want to follow up with, you mentioned that AI now has the ability where they can provide you with that information. So when it comes to booking travel, particularly for students, which is what students focuses on, what do you think are the key factors that they should be considering if they're not, maybe they're intimidated to use AI like me? So what are these factors that they should be thinking about?
Yeah, and even just to be clear, I mean, the AI stuff is a little ways off from us, right? So I kind of have these like pie in the sky ideas when I use it. So that's not a push for StudentUniverse driving AI yet. But I think for booking travel, in the case of the student, it's very much like when I started my career, it was getting them excited to go on a spring break program or backpack through Europe. But now it is very much an educational experience. Like my career has shifted from the leisure to the educational. And I think if you're an account manager that's any good, you're going to try to align your goals with those of the institutions that you're partnered with. So taking on that sort of educational approach and understanding that not every student is created the same. Obviously, some of us have more opportunity than others, and it's important to sort of focus on that and direct your message in that manner. So for me, it's very much like, are you an independent student that can sort this out on your own because you've been fortunate enough to have parents that have enabled you to go places? Or do you need someone that can sit down and actually explain to you how the industry works without it being a sales pitch? It's just, I'm going to consult with you like a travel or like an academic advisor would at a university, but just sort of in that travel space. So I think it's education ultimately, and then just helping them to understand that travel is complicated and we can help you through that. And then at the end of that, it's really about obviously the health and safety bit of it and just sort of understanding emergency support, and that there's layers of people there to help them through what can be a very stressful time and something they're not completely familiar with.
Right. And I thank you, because I know travel for me in college was very scary. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know where to go. And Phil, I just wanted to kind of piggyback of what David said, with people being a little bit apprehensive or not too sure, or, you know, maybe they don't have the right information. They weren't raised in a society or an area where they were provided this access of information. Now, your company, Hilltop Global Group, focuses on changing the narrative within Africa, right? The perception. Now, what changes do you think have occurred in the perception of travel to Africa over the last few decades, in your opinion?
Let's start with Afrobeat. That's one. But no, seriously, you know, historically, Africa has been viewed in through a very narrow lens. And, you know, and that has led to, you know, these outdated stereotypes being manifested and these misconceptions being practiced by many people, perpetuated rather by many people. But the good thing is so many things have happened to sort of disrupt that monolithic portrayal of the continent, because there is indeed so much diversity on the continent that it saddens me, you know, when people often refer to Africa as one place. But that has changed. And one of the biggest things is in your line of work, social media. Social media has been transformative. You know, you have things like travel blogs, documentaries, and programs that, you know, showcase the beauty and complexity of the continent. Additionally, there's been a growing recognition of Africa's economic potential and, the technological advancement that are happening on the continent through, policy initiatives, trade initiatives that are currently underway on the continent. And the continent is indeed experiencing, significant growth, economic growth, rapid urbanization. We have also the youngest population in the world. And so, in the next 20, 30 years, the global workforce is going to be from the African continent. That has already manifested in things like remote work, outsourcing of jobs that used to be historically focused on India and elsewhere is now shifted to the African continent because there's so many brilliant young minds that are doing phenomenal work. And then, of course, through these educational initiatives and programs that companies like Hilltop run, study abroad programs, experiential learning, which is our focus, that is squarely, at least from Hilltop's standpoint, is squarely focused on altering those perceptions of Africa in a very non-threatening, very organic way, because it happens naturally. You go, you visit, you see, and then suddenly you realize, oh, people here live in houses just like we do. People ride in cars, speak English, do all of the things that may have been thought of as not possible or not happening on the continent, hence breaking those stereotypes and many, many other things. I mentioned Afrobeats in the beginning jokingly, but quite frankly, it's been a game changer. I mean, look at all the collaborations that are happening with Wizkid and Burna Boy and Davido and all of these other what's the name, Chris Brown, and all of these collaborations. So a lot is happening to really disrupt those negative stereotypes.
Thank you. And I know you mentioned Afrobeats, and I was nodding yes, because Afrobeats is taking over as it should, because, it's some of the best. And one of my favorites right now is Tyla. So I'm excited to eventually I would love to go to Ghana one day, or Nigeria. So I'm really glad to hear about, Hilltop and bringing and changing the stereotype around the continent of Africa, Phil. And I kind of want to segue into Kate. So Phil mentioned that, the Hilltop is to change the narrative of Africa. Now, with COVID, there was an impact, a negative impact that happened during COVID with China and in the aftermath of the pandemic. I'm interested in hearing a little bit about your perspective on the current state of study abroad opportunities there in China now.
Sure, Makeda. Let me start big picture. I would say that the Biden-Xi meeting, Xi Jinping meeting with Biden in mid-November, really kind of changed the tone of the dialogue recently for the good. And everybody's very hopeful about the fact that Xi mentioned that there would be, he would welcome 50,000 American students to China over the next 5 years. And the numbers right now, the American Embassy says we had 350 American students studying in China in 2023. In contrast, 2018, 2019, we had over 11,000 American students there. So it's being slow to recover right now on mainland. Taiwan has done very well, but the Fulbright China program is not reinstated. It was suspended under Trump in 2020. And I really think that needs to come back quickly. After all, it was founded after the 2 world wars as a way to promote peace and understanding in the world. So we really need Biden to reinstate that with an executive order. And then the level 3 that the State Department puts on China is really impeding some progress, because some universities and risk managers at the universities are reluctant to return to China as long as it remains a level 3, which is reconsider travel. So on a specific level, academic travel abroad's study abroad division is CET academic programs. So we have a large study abroad division, and we have reopened in Beijing in the summer, and we had a good cohort of students there. We have Shanghai that reopened in the fall. We originally had more cities in China pre-pandemic. We're not necessarily going to open a lot more going forward. We hope to build momentum, but Taiwan has remained very strong for the last 2 years. We've had over 90 students every semester. And our Asia director, Adam Jones, was just in China for a few weeks, and he was there during the Xi-Biden meeting and reported that immediately the national news pivoted to being much more hopeful and much more positive about US-China relations. And even our host university partners were basically saying, did you see that they mentioned 50,000 American students? So I think that's very hopeful. And I would end with just saying that our students' experiences in the last year have been superb. I mean, there is no negative impact on them. We hear about anti-American sentiment, but they have not experienced any of that. And their learning and education is as rich as it was pre-pandemic.
Oh, wow. I'm glad to hear that. I know that there was a huge shift post-pandemic. So I'm glad to hear that it's slowly starting to pick up. Now, I'm gonna go back to Phil because Kate touched on something that I wanted to talk about, shifting that narrative around China and East Asia. I would like to hear your thoughts, Phil, on some of the most effective ways on how you think people can demystify those stereotypes surrounding, well, particularly Africa for you, and I'll ask Kate again.
Sure, thank you for that. So I think number one is really student testimonials. The students come back and tell the story, and I know this firsthand because I always look at 2 bookmarks on our engagements. The first being, sort of the orientation pre-travel with a lot of anxiety and questions and concerns, to the final event in country where everybody's totally transformed and excited, ready to change the world, ready to come back and tell those stories. So I think student testimonials definitely is number one in my book. Of course, establishing global partnerships, partnerships with institutions on the continent, collaborative engagements between African and foreign universities. A lot of that is happening now, organically, university by university. Some of it is being enhanced through like Department of Commerce, Department of State programs and so forth. And then really, I think, we are inherently a capitalistic society. So when you look at the world today, a lot of places have almost tapped out in terms of economic opportunity. But the African continent is just really on the rise. And there's tremendous opportunities across the board for any and everybody that's interested in business, from the creatives to finance to, you name it. And so when you discuss and highlight those opportunities, that translates into people actually going to see and want to participate themselves. That's yet another way to really showcase, or rather demystify the continent, as I like to call it, and really demystify and change those narratives. Now, the final thing that I will touch on is going back to a point that I made earlier about the monolithic portrayal. So challenge that by highlighting the diversity. And in our case, we serve on multiple destinations on the continent. But I think highlighting the diversity, just emphasizing, Africa's immense, the cultural, linguistic, ethnic diversity, wide range of lifestyles, traditions, languages. Even within one country, there's so much diversity and beauty. And so with that is just emphasizing those diverse narratives, talking about narratives, and telling the story, and then once, by acknowledging this diversity, I think you really, really challenge that monolithic portrayal of the continent.
Wow, thank you so much, Phil. And you mentioned one of the most things that to help demystify is student testimonials. And I know that David works with students, as the agent. Now, David, why do you think it's important for these young people, the students that you work with, to have access to travel, regardless of their financial or other barriers they may have?
Yeah, I mean, the obvious one is there's a clear advantage to being an educated human being, right? And what you don't know can be a real detriment to your success in life and can, in some cases, make you feel like maybe you're not as valuable as a contributor to society as somebody else, right? And obviously, we know that's kind of not true in most cases. But I think for someone like me who potentially had an easier opportunity than others, it's kind of changed the way that I frame my conversation with the students. So I just think there's a number of interesting destinations they could go to, right, to sort of expand their horizons and learn. And it's just a matter of, are you going to poke through that bubble and maybe go somewhere like London, which there's nothing wrong with that, or are you going to burst through that bubble and go somewhere in Africa and really challenge yourself to learn and grow as a person? So I think it's a very clear, issue in different segments of the entire world. There's underrepresented groups that just don't have that real opportunity. And at least someone like me or other folks on this call can at least try to, in some way, maybe open the door for them, or at least share your own experience and sort of give them the confidence to understand that it's, put yourself out there. And I think you'll kind of appreciate that experience and the impact it would have on your future self, essentially.
And David, do you think that you working in the travel industry has influenced or changed the way you plan your own travel?
Oh yeah, I'm terrible. I'm super organized with the client, and then I just kind of freewheel it for myself. But I think in general, it's sort of just opened me up to this idea of maybe if you go to a place, you don't necessarily have to focus on like seeing specific landmarks or just hitting like a checklist of things to do or see. And I know obviously this is really about education at the end of the day, but it's sort of maybe going down that off the beaten track, getting into the local community and actually having conversations with people that are within that community. So then you can break down these stereotypes that Phil are talking about and actually learn something and realize they're not so different. And it's interesting because it comes kind of like a reversal as well. We do like a lot of business with Chinese customers as a global company. So even talking from like a destination standpoint, you see them coming to the US in droves and other parts of the world. So it's not even really just about us sending underrepresented people from this area to other places, but it's about them coming to us too, right? So we can kind of further break down those lines or walls.
Or walls, yeah. And David, you mentioned destination, so that makes me actually want to ask Kate, in your opinion, where do you think people be traveling in 2025, 2030, beyond? Where do you see the travel going in the future?
Well, honestly, it may sound a little cynical, but in the shorter term, I think we're going to travel to places that are relatively safe and where peace dominates and where the destination marketing funds and travel press are focused. Everybody seemed to be going to Portugal last year, and now everybody seems to be planning a trip to Greece in this coming year. So I do think that there's where the money is, where the press is, people tend to listen to that. I do think sustainability has been the call to go to less touristed places has been heated. But the irony is that then everybody goes to the place that was less touristed and it's no longer less touristed. But in the longer term, I do think space travel is on the horizon. And eventually, I think we're going to figure out how to cut down on time spent on an airplane. And that means that far-flung places will become a lot closer to us.
Wow, space travel. I'm very intimidated by that, but Phil, I'm going to pass it over to you because I saw your face react when she mentioned that. Where do you see travel going to in the next few years?
I'm definitely not going to space, but I do think Kate has a point there. There is some interest in that. I think the shift is going to be to, and I don't like the term, but I'll use it anyway, the non-traditional destinations that have been underserved. Because how many times can you go to Paris? How many times can you go to London? How many times can you go to China? There's so much else of the world to see. And selfishly, I would say that the many countries on the African continent, 54 very unique, diverse destinations, will be the next hotspot. I think it's already happening. And there is a economic initiative currently underway that you may or may not be aware of. It's akin to the European Union. It's called the African Continental Free Trade Area. If you have time, Google it. And so you don't get much media talk about that on this side of the pond, but essentially what's happening is talking about the economic opportunities on the continent. This is creating one common market, eventually promoting trade, intra-African trade, also reducing reliance on imports. Historically, most African countries import products because there's no manufacturing capacity and base. And so in the foreseeable future, once that initiative crystallizes, everybody's going to be flocking there for these opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my prediction.
Is there a certain country within Africa that you see that a lot of people tend to flock to or will be flocking to in the few years?
Again, I'm gonna exercise my bias because I'm probably the only person here from Ghana. So yes, Ghana is a hot spot for many reasons. Kate talked about safety. I like to say perceptions of safety, peaceful, politically stable, all of these things. So definitely a hot destination. Just judging from personal experience, I do have metrics to prove that from my programs. So yes, I would say Ghana, but there's many more to see and do.
And I would agree with you. As someone that's not from Ghana, I could also agree. I know there's a lot of things, especially like the year of the return that we had talked about and all the things that Ghana has planned. So I would agree with that, Phil. And David, I'm going to ask you a question. So we spoke briefly at the beginning where your journey kind of went from a different field to traveling. I wanted to ask you, when you're helping our students plan their trips, now that you are your expert in your role, is there something that students should really focus on when they're booking? What's the first thing? For example, if I was your student, I was someone that needed help, what's the first thing that you would inform me or mention that I should be focusing on?
Yeah, that's a tricky question, right? Because sometimes when you're looking for fares online and you love that the airlines now have taken the economy cabin and have essentially broken it into like 8 different sections. So people looking at stuff online are just, I feel like some people kind of get it that are experienced, but some people are just like, I don't even know what I'm getting into. So I think it's very much like if you're feeling comfortable with looking online and navigating that, whether it's through StudentUniverse or another online provider, just please read the words that are on the page that are kind of walking you through some of these terms and conditions. It can be very heavy and it seems like a very basic thing. But also a part of it is if they end up working with an actual travel agent, they don't even know what that means anymore, right? Like some of us, if you had used a travel agent in the 90s or early 2000s, and maybe you still use one for certain personal trips, and that's fine. But a lot of the students just don't have that experience. So it's kind of empowering them to understand it's a transactional conversation. You don't have to accept the first thing we send you. You don't have to say yes to everything. You can ask questions, and we're there to sort of provide you the information. And then you, as a young professional, can make the decision whether or not that's right for you to sort of purchase that. So I think in a way, it's the education and just getting them to sort of understand what the process is and even booking travel and what does it mean.
Okay. And speaking of just learning a little bit more of that education, Kate, I wanted to ask you, what, in your opinion, are the significant changes that you may have observed in the field of international education?
There's so many, because I'm old and it's been 35 years. So I would say one of the things I've noticed is that we no longer judge the duration as if it's too short as being lacking in value. I think now we recognize that access to international education means that any time abroad is better than no time abroad. So that recognition has become much more prevalent now. And certainly I know the Fund for Education Abroad has revised its requirements to allow for shorter terms abroad. So I think that's a big change. Obviously, I think in most destinations, accommodations and student support are much better than they were 30 years ago. I think the level of recognition of identity and the intersectionality that happens when the students go abroad is much more recognized and supported in a way that makes the experience richer.
And Kate, why do you think it's important to create, I guess, these particular opportunities for these particular students? You know, like you mentioned, the Black, Indigenous, people of color. Why do you think it's so important for these particular?
Well, I often say that I wish our US Department of Education would mandate that every high school student in this country has to have a term abroad as part of their education, because I feel like the younger the mind is, when you're able to experience our common humanity across borders and realize the great beauty and diversity of the human race, the better off we are in terms of being a people that is self-aware, resilient, culturally sensitive, and open-minded. And I think it would completely change the way our world works if we really invested in youth getting that awareness earlier.
And David, do you agree with Kate's sentiment on the importance of creating opportunities for these particular students, or what are your feelings about that?
Yeah, I think it's been a very interesting experience living in the US over the last 5 years. And I think it's very clear that there's some sort of dividing lines between people that don't feel very productive, at least to me personally, and I'm sure others on the call. So I think the concept of sort of mandating that thing would be a wonderful thing, right? There's an incredible amount you can learn simply from having a conversation with somebody else and understanding that maybe even if you don't agree, it's okay. Let's talk about it, right? And I think the more that we can kind of instill that or try to teach future generations just to be more accepting and learning, then maybe we won't have so many back and forth issues, right? That can be stoked by certain styles of leadership. So yeah, I mean, honestly, I just agree. It's a good statement and a good sentiment, and I think it's important, but it's also a major challenge to probably institute something like that, right? From the U.S. Department of
Yeah, it's never
Education.
going to happen. It's just
No,
my pipe dreams.
right. And then you have the issue of parents just not even really agreeing that people should be educated a certain way. So it's a huge challenge for educators, right? And unfortunately, it feels like, at least in this country, those dividing lines are sort of becoming thicker. And that's not good. But in these positions, right, we can at least have the conversation and try to institute change. So yeah, I think it's a great idea.
And Phil, of course, I've heard Kate and David's sentiments towards it. I would love to hear what your thoughts are on if it's important, why it's important to create these opportunities for these particular underrepresented students.
Oh, I mean, access is absolutely critical. As I mentioned, these experiences are life-changing, they're transformational, and so I think everyone should have the opportunity, even if they're not able to afford it. Hence, I applaud FEA for all that you do, trying to bridge that gap. It's just been such for me personally, a very rewarding experience to firsthand witness these transformations on every single program. I don't go on all programs, but the ones that I do go on, and I'll just share a story from one of my recent trips that I traveled with a group, and there was one male student in the group, and sometimes you don't know who's watching, and so this young man, at the very end of the program, we had like a gala event, and so a few days before, he came to me and said, "Mr. Phil, what should I wear for the event?" Because he had seen how people carry themselves around. This was in Ghana. Everybody's nicely dressed in something like I'm wearing, traditional, but very sharp. And so he said, "What should I wear? I've never worn a suit before, whatnot." And so I said to him, "It's a great question." And so I took him to my tailor, who had some clothes made for him for the event. And if you see the swag and the pep in his step and his just confidence, and I'll share a picture. Before we end, I'll share a picture to prove what I'm saying. This guy was blowing this thing all over Instagram, and today he calls me Uncle Phil, thanks me. He said, "I've never had custom clothing made ever in my life, and I felt so good." And it's little things like that. The transformation happens in so many ways. And to me, that's been a phenomenal story that I like to tell about the impact of these programs and why everyone should be part of it.
So that is a beautiful story. I know you mentioned it's just something small of getting something custom made, but that's a really impactful time for that person's life. And I'm sure it's completely shifted his trajectory, because I know it did mine when I moved to South Korea. And I only just have one more question that I'd like to ask the panel. So audience, if you're still here, please get those questions into the chat box, because we're going to be getting to those questions just in a minute. Now, I know we were going through the topic of, travel and why it's important, for all to be able to travel abroad. If there was one particular country that you had to think that this was the country or the city or wherever that really changed your view on travel, is there a particular country what is that particular country if it is? David, I'll go to you first.
Yeah, that's a good question. And it's actually something as an agent I used to be asked all the time, like, what's your favorite destination, right? And my thoughts on that have changed over the years. I think going back to what I said originally, I think New Zealand in a way, just because it was my first, not necessarily my first. I'm from Detroit, Michigan, so I can get into Canada in about 20 minutes, but they joke that doesn't really count as international travel. So I had done Canada before, but New Zealand, just because for me it was one of the first ones. It's an interesting country. It's not exactly a super exotic destination, right? Although they do have very beautiful countryside and all of that. But I think just for me, because it was the first time, I had a bit of a personal tragedy in my life at the time where a friend of mine had taken his own life. So there was a sort of dual moment where I was sort of growing up, I guess, and just kind of experiencing something completely different and outside of my comfort zone. And I think it was just that moment because it was sort of like the catalyst. And I came back to my travel agent job and I'm like, all right, this is pretty awesome. And I'm learning something just from doing this. So plenty of other destinations, like, Vietnam is one I've done recently that was very interesting as well, right? There's a little bit more of culture shock involved with that. But I think I just kind of come back to that sort of origin story and that trip because it's such a like a personal impact for me and just, yeah, interesting stuff for sure.
Thank you, David. I've never been to New Zealand, but now that you've shared this, I think I want to add that to my itinerary at some point. And Kate, to close up, I would also extend that same question to you. Is there a particular country that really just shifted your view on travel, or the country that just opened your mind to travel being your career?
It's a tough question for me because being a diplomat's kid, I grew up in other countries and not in this country. So I would say in terms of the ones I visited since I'm a grown up, Laos was a revelation to me because it felt, you saw people, it was a country that was bombed to oblivion, right, during the Vietnam War, a secret war. And so there are just hundreds of thousands of these old mortars and missiles, and they've made them into flower pots. And so there are these beautiful flowers brimming from all of this violence, and the serenity of the people of Laos, the Buddhism, it just felt like such an amazing contrast and such a statement on human resilience. And the beauty of the religion and the people was really profound to me. So it's a place I feel like I could live because it was so welcoming.
Yeah, and I've, again, similar to with David, I've never been to Laos, but I like that vision of where you said it was, war, and then it kind of, this beautiful thing came, kind of like the flower through the concrete concept.
Yes.
And Phil, of course, I would love to know, what country was it for you that was the shift or the change?
Well, as I mentioned in the beginning, I was in Vietnam and Hong Kong for my capstone project, and it was about global tourism. So I was actually studying infrastructure, I was studying policies, I was studying all the things that makes a destination attractive, and just comparing those two. But I would say, in my view, Hong Kong had that effect on me where you can see how intentional planning and a combination of things makes a destination really attractive, as a travel destination. So for me, I would say Hong Kong really had that effect on me in terms of, the transitioning into the business.
Thank you, Phil and Kate and David. So I am going to wrap up the Q&A from my end. So now I'm going to take it over to the chat and see if we have Any questions from the audience into our chat? Okay, let's go. And Angie, if you see any, I'm trying to scroll through, let me know. Okay.
I think we've got them all excited to travel is what it looks like.
All right, so we have a question for Phil. I see from Michelle Ramos. Thank you, Michelle. Phil, she's asking, what was the program that you mentioned?
Yeah, I think Angie posted a link in there.
Okay.
Yeah,
Angie
but
did.
it's the African Continental Free Trade Area.
Okay. I see, Angie. Thank you, Angie. I didn't notice that you were down there. All right. David, are very proud. Okay, so this is from Natalie. David from a very proud New Zealander on the call. So some New Zealand love in the chat, David. Let's see, to jump off the while. All right, top 5 in no order. This is from Michelle, Japan, Brazil, Iceland, Russia, Antarctica. Wow, all blew my mind. Those are some awesome places. I have only been to one on there. Let's see. All right, so I guess I'll ask you folks, since Michelle and Angie are sharing their top 5 in no order. Phil, what are your top 5 in no particular order?
Destinations?
Yes, destinations.
To visit?
To visit.
So I will put Turkey.
Turkey.
I would put I'd put Hong Kong definitely.
Mhm.
I would put South Africa
Mhm.
in no particular order. Can you put where you're from or no? You don't have to.
Of course.
Of course, I'll put Ghana as a destination. And I would put, what would be the last one? I actually would put Vietnam as well.
That's a good one. All right, and now, David, what are your top 5 travel destinations?
Yeah, sure. So in no particular order, New Zealand, right, as I've already explained, Vietnam as well. I think that was sort of an interesting turning point for me because I was there for effectively a sales conference, and then I was given a FAM afterwards, which is like a travel agent, like a familiarization. Basically they're just teaching you about a tour product, right? And the benefit is you get to go for free, which was awesome. But really just interesting for me as an American because none of that period there actually covered the war or any of that history. So I was like in a weird place where I was in Vietnam and not actually engaging in sort of an important piece of it. But I think just sort of being in that country and it was my first trip into Asia. So that one was a big one. Slovenia in Europe, which most people might not even really think about. And that's mainly more of a personal thing. Like it was the first backpacking trip I had done with my wife where we bounced around a couple of places in Europe. So just being in sort of some of these far off like Eastern European countries or areas that you're just not really thinking about all the time, I think was fairly interesting for us at the time. I would also list Venice, Italy, which I've never been to, but only because they teach you as a travel agent that you are airport codes can be very similar and you can accidentally book people to the wrong place in the world. And it's like travel agent 101, like don't do that. And I literally, the only time I've ever done it in my career was to myself and my wife. I had booked us into Austria twice within one trip. So we were supposed to go to Venice. We never made it to Venice, but we were in Austria twice in the same trip, which is also a wonderful city. But my wife is still kicking me because we haven't been to Venice. Yeah, exactly. I see Kate laughing at me, but I'll end on this because it doesn't get enough love and it's not international, but I'm from Detroit and I love Detroit. So come to Detroit and have some fun when you get a chance.
Hey, I like that. Detroit, I've never been, so maybe you're gonna sell some of us on
Hey,
Detroit.
well, yeah, let's get out there and do a tour. We'll have some fun. But no, it's a very interesting city right now, especially the city center. Just food and art and you're seeing the city kind of being rebuilt right before our very eyes. So not exactly on the topic of international, but it's relevant in a way, right? And watching how other cities in the world sort of develop over time.
It's definitely relevant, and now it's going to be on my list of places I need to visit. Kate, what is your top 5 destinations in no particular order?
I love that story, David. That's a great story.
Thank you.
Well, I guess places I love to go, France and China are near and dear to my heart. I do think that Egypt is one of the places that blew my mind in terms of the ancient history and things that are still standing that you can still touch. Laos, and I agree that Turkey is really spectacular.
Wow, I need to get my stamps up because all of these places that you have been, I've yet to go. So, I mean, I have an itinerary. And David, I'm going to ask you if I do need any help, or do you only work with students? Because I have graduated many years.
Hey, if you're in the area, just send me an
Okay.
email. I would be happy to give anybody a tour of the city. It's a really fun place, and I think it's eye-opening for folks. So always happy to hang out and meet new people.
So now I'm just going to quickly go through and read some of these others. Oh, we have, that is my brother, everyone, who's Jamaica all in through the chat. Yes, I am Jamaican American. So I guess that's just his number 1 and number 2 and 3 and 4 and 5, it appears. Next, and I would also clearly have to agree. Amar, Denmark, India, New Zealand, Albania, South Korea, and Chile. Those are some really great countries. Fisher is hoping to go to Chile, Greece, Turkey, Sweden, or Iceland. Oh, awesome. I've also wanted to go to Greece. I think my mom is in here at some point, so I think she also wants to go. And Lisa, hi Lisa. She loved Italy and her dream is Egypt. And I think Kate, you said you've been to Egypt and that was one of the places. I've yet to go there and I would love to go as well. I'm just going to read Angie. Sometimes a privileged child makes you love your hometown even more. I'm from Baltimore. Does anyone, all right, I'm just that this will be the last one. I'm just pinpointing what Angie mentioned. Do you all agree with what Angie said, that travel makes you love your hometown a little bit more? David, what do you think?
Well, yeah, 100%. As much as I love being overseas, there is always that element of kind of going home to your own bed and a certain comfort in home, even though, part of this is getting outside of your comfort zone. But I think I think you come home and you kind of see things in a different way. And I think hopefully you learn something and maybe you treat your neighbor a little bit differently. So yeah, I mean, it goes hand in hand, right? You're going overseas to be educated, but there's absolutely value that you can bring home to your own little pocket in the world.
Yes, and Kate, do you agree with that? Do you think when you travel and come back, there's more of an appreciation for your home and where you're from?
That's actually one of my favorite quotes. If you look it up by G.K. Chesterton, he says, it's not about traveling abroad as much as setting foot on your own land as a foreign land when you come back. And that transformation, that shift of perspective is all important.
And can you was that GK? What was that?
G.K. Chesterton, an old white guy.
Yeah, I like that.
The 19th century.
And,
He was very controversial in the day.
Controversial, but hey, a good quote is a good quote. And Phil, I'm gonna finish up. How about you?
I
Do you
agree.
think?
I think they both stated it very eloquently. So yeah, definitely agree.
All right, Phil is just signing off with. All right, so everyone, it looks like we're just at that a little bit earlier before that 1:30 mark. I'm gonna ask anyone in the audience if you have any questions. Now is your time. This will be the last one from Fisher. If you've never traveled alone or outside the country, do you think it's better to study abroad for a few weeks? All right, so this will be the last question from Fisher. Do you think it's better to study abroad for a few weeks or to go for the whole semester? Phil, I'll start with you. Few weeks or a whole semester?
I think if you've never done it before, I think you start slow, maybe do a short-term program, get, acquainted and then get the bug and, you do a longer term the next time around.
Good night. David, I saw you nodding your head. Was that in agreement, short term versus the...
Yeah, I mean, if you have someone that just is not sure, I think you can kind of logically walk them through that process and let them present options, right? And let them kind of decide from there. But I think unless you're feeling particularly adventurous, you would certainly probably be a little less stressed knowing it's just a few weeks. And there are instances of students going overseas and feeling so overwhelmed. Some of them actually end up backing out of a program and going home, even though, you try not to have that happen. So you can mitigate that risk, I guess, and still kind of ease them into it, especially for those that are a little more anxious about it.
I agree. And Kate, I see you nodding your head. Is that in agreement with Phil and David?
Yeah, I think everybody is different, and it really, I think counseling the student based on who they are and what their background is really important, because maybe this will be their only opportunity to get out, and so maybe if they can afford it and be away for longer, great. But it all depends on where they are in their lives.
Okay, thank you. We're just about out of time, everyone. So I want to thank our fantastic panelists sharing all their advice with us. And I want to thank Angie and the FEA team for inviting me to be a moderator for this event. And I want to thank all of you in the chat box that were asking questions and commenting. And I hope you guys are all leaving this conversation more knowledgeable on the travel industry and a little bit more inspired, you know, in ways to support global travel and maybe just supporting the travel of your own and getting your stamps up. So I hope you guys have a great day and enjoy your lunch.
Thank you, Kita.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it.
Thank you,
Take care.
Kita, for
Bye.
hosting this. This was amazing.
Those that are still on, this is the moment I was talking
Oh,
about.
right on.
Oh,
Oh, wow.
tailored really nicely. I
That's
can,
fabulous.
Yeah, you
Yeah,
both
that's-
look sharp,
yes.
for sure.
Sorry
Beautiful.
to steal the
Thanks for sharing.
steal the mic from you. Thank you all so much. This was great.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye, Kate.
everyone.
Angie.